So welcome everybody to our Yom HaShoah, our Holocaust Memorial Ceremony today. I'm Rabbi Stephen Sachs, the president of the Rabbinical Association of Rabbis and Cantors of Delaware. I'm honored to be here representing not only Derech, the Rabbinical Association of Rabbi and Cantors, but also the Helena Wynn Preston Holocaust Education Committee. So let me just share a few remarks on my own, and then we have some dignitaries I'll be honored to call up. If we look at the Bible, there is no word in the Bible for history. If you want to say history in Hebrew, you have to say historia, which is obviously an English word, which is borrowed. When the Torah, the Bible, speaks about history, it's not talking about history, it says zachor, remember. Why isn't there a word for history in the Bible? Why does it say zachor, remember? Well, think about the word history itself. History, his story. By definition, it's something that happened to somebody else. The Torah is saying, no, this is not something that happened to somebody else. This is something you must remember. In particular, it's talking about the attack the Amalekites did against Bnei Israel, the children of Israel, as they were leaving Egypt. Who did they attack? The weakest, the elderest, that's a word, the elderly, who are having trouble keeping up. It's a cowardly attack. And what the Torah is saying is, you don't dare forget that this type of evil still exists in the world. When you have the ability, the strength to fight that evil, it is your responsibility to do it. Unfortunately, we don't have to really think too hard to remember evil exists. The shootings in Pittsburgh and now Poway, as well as the other hate crimes which have taken place, remind us all too well that there is still much evil in the world. So what I'd like to do for a brief moment is just ask for a moment of silence to remember the victims now of the Poway tragedy. Thank you. The silence is powerful. It reminds us as the victims, it allows us to commemorate the memories. However, silence is not enough. We need to have zero tolerance for anti-Semitism and other type of hate crimes. And when I say anti-Semitism, let me be very clear about this. I'm also talking to thinly veiled anti-Semitic attempts to destroy the Jewish state through economic and political action. As Senator Charles Schumer said, there is one word for this type of behavior: anti-Semitism. You can disagree with Israel's policies all you want to, but when you attempt to destroy the world's only Jewish state, you have crossed the line. We just finished celebrating Passover, and we read about, during Passover, Moses, one of our heroes. And we're told that Moses walks out of the Pharaoh's palace. His adopted grandfather is Pharaoh. It's a Zaidi, which means grandfather for all intents and purposes. And he sees an Egyptian taskmaster beating a Hebrew slave. Moses, we're told, looks ko v'cho. He looks this way and then that way. Why? Well, here's my theory on why he's looking both ways. He's come to a fork in the roads. He could go this way and say, you know, life is easy for me. For all intents and purposes, I am a prince of Egypt. I can live an easy life. Who cares about the poor slave who's being beaten? Or I could see that there's something wrong, step up and do something about it. And that's what Moses chooses to do. And because of that, he saved a nation. I want you now to look as Moses did this way and that way, while you're pretending for just a mere moment you're a Jewish person living in a shtetl, in a small town somewhere in Europe. Look this way and that way, and now pretend there's another person on each side of you. Just do that for a moment, please. I want to see this way, that way. That's how many more Jews there would have been in the world if there had been a state of Israel during the Holocaust. It's estimated to be 3 times as many Jews. If there had been a Jewish state, many of those people would have been saved. There'd be many more Jewish children born. The state of Israel is the ultimate guarantor that when we say never again, we mean it. Today, we are gathered here today to say never again. Thank you. It's my honor now to call up the governor of our great state of Delaware, Governor John Carney.
Thank you, Rabbi, and good afternoon to all of you. It's great to be here with each of you this afternoon for this really solemn ceremony and remembrance. At the event at the Chabad Center on Tuesday night to mourn the victims of this weekend's shootings in California, Rabbi Vogel shared a Yiddish phrase, which I'll try, oif simkas, that he said meant roughly, may the next time we meet be under happier circumstances. Year after year, I've been coming to this event, and I keep hoping it will feel less urgent than it did the year before. Unfortunately, though, this is the second time in 1 week that many of us here have gathered. The synagogue shootings in California and in Pittsburgh make the importance of today all the more clear and certainly all the more urgent. This morning I was joined by many here, many of the rabbis at the governor's prayer breakfast, where members of many faiths gathered to pause, to pray, and to reflect. Rabbi Beals was musing on what God's plan was in having the governor's prayer breakfast and this Yom HaShoah event on the same day. But as I looked around the room at the various faith leaders present, it struck me that none of us are immune from the hatred and bigotry that led to the Holocaust. But as Rabbi Beal says, if we could come together in the spirit of the prayer breakfast this morning, we could stop, or at least help put an end to such hate and bigotry. And so for me, today is a time to remind ourselves that we're all in this together, that we share the same humanity, and that it's up to all of us from every faith tradition to create a world where Yom HaShoah, the Holocaust Remembrance Day, is a day where we remember something that was unimaginable, that we must make sure never happens again. Not a day where we reflect on fresh wounds and death and suffering just 1 week ago. In many ways, it's extremely disheartening to look at human history and realize how little progress we've made in understanding that we are all made in the image and likeness of God, our Creator. In other ways, though, we can be encouraged that here in Delaware, a state of neighbors, we can join hands today as a community and say together, never again. Rabbi Beals, what was God saying with that?
Rabbi. Too much technology.
Time for a nap.
He goes, I got you. Look at this under here.
It's my honor to call up the mayor of Wilmington, Mike Krzyzewski.
The job of mayor is to be prepared at all times, to be called up and asked to speak when I wasn't prepared for it. So let me just say a couple of things. What bothers me so much about today is we have an entire generation, maybe 2 generations of people who have forgotten. And maybe we should understand that they will forget. But I will tell you, if we don't remind them about the terrible things that we're all capable of as human beings, we'll be repeating another kind of horrific incident again. And so I always think of myself as having been born 15 minutes after World War II. We lived in World War II My whole life was World War II. You know, our whole growing up life was everything horrible that happened that is unimaginable. A war where 250,000 people died, followed by a war where 50,000 people died, followed by, within 10 years, another war. And we have a whole generation of young people who don't understand that that's a real possibility. That as human beings, we are capable of so much goodness and so much evil at the same time. All I can say to you is I stand here moved and motivated to do everything that I can to sound the alarm to our younger generations that if you don't grab the reins, if you don't try to make it a better world, then people lesser than you will run the world. Thank you.
Thank you, Mayor. It's my honor to call upon the Attorney General, Cathy Jennings.
Thank you, Rabbi, and good afternoon, everyone. I have a speech here, and I'm going to give it, and it will be short, as promised, but I have to begin with a bit of a personal statement. My mother was Irish Catholic, redheaded, freckled, Peggy was her name. And she married when I was, I think, 9 or 10, a Jewish doctor named Harry Raphael. My Irish Catholic mother went on to join Hadassah and took me when I was very young to a lunch where I met a woman who had etched in her skin the concentration camp numbers. That was the first belief, that was the first knowledge I had of the horrors of hatred and what took place in pure hatred of people because of your religion, because of your religion. And my mother read everything she could. She handed down books about Adolf Eichmann, and I learned the history, the English word, history of this. But I'll never forget the woman with those numbers etched on her skin. It says it all. We are here today to remember the millions lost to an unspeakable campaign of violence born of hatred and ignorance. The memory of the Holocaust hangs heavy on our hearts and reminds us that we can never take for granted a culture of peace and empathy. We continue to see the ripples of the Holocaust and the racism and complacency that enabled it. We are reminded that chants of anti-Semitism were not silenced in Berlin, but echo on to this day in San Diego, in Pittsburgh, and elsewhere. We are better than the violence and racism that continue to stalk the Jewish people and so many of our neighbors who look, speak, and worship differently from us. But we are only better than anti-Semitism if we choose to be, and if we actively choose to be. Simon Wiesenthal once said, "For evil to flourish, it requires good to do nothing." And so today we remember not only to commemorate those millions of people who have been lost, but also to stand with those who are with us today. Anti-Semitism is anti each and every one of us. You are us and we are you. There is no difference when it comes to fighting ignorance and hatred. I will close by saying, in the words of Elie Wiesel, that never again is more than a slogan. It is a prayer and it is a promise. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Attorney General Jennings. I'd like to acknowledge the following individuals here now. J.J. Francis, representing Senator Chris Coons' office. Bonnie Wu, representing Congressman Tom Carper's office. Corey Marshall Steele, State of Delaware Division of Archives. Stephen Morris, State of Delaware Division of Archives. And I would now like to introduce our guest speaker, Barbara Markham. I'm pronouncing your name correctly, Barbara Markham. She is a member of the teaching staff of Padua. I asked before and I blanked out already. Padua. So please come up, Barbara.
Good afternoon. 7 years ago, I was teaching about post-World War II politics when a student commented, "It seems to me that once the United States recognized Israel, all of Israel's enemies became ours. Is that because of the Holocaust thing?" I was interested in the expression of the Holocaust thing, so I began to canvass students about their knowledge of the Holocaust. They knew very little. Most had heard of Anne Frank, some had known of Elie Wiesel, and there was no course in our curriculum that addressed the Holocaust. Their previous United States history course ended at 1945, and the Holocaust was given, sadly, minimal treatment. This omission prompted me to develop an elective dedicated to teaching about the Holocaust. In the years since, I have devoted my summers to professional study and travel in order to craft and enhance my curriculum of the Holocaust. I cannot talk about my Holocaust course without mentioning my good friend Steve Gonzer, chair of the Helena Wynne Preston Holocaust Education Committee. He's also a filmmaker behind No Denying, the video testimonies of hundreds of survivors and liberators from Delaware. Not only does Steve support my programs and talk to my students about his work, but Steve gives me and many teachers constant encouragement and reminds us always that what we try to do matters. In 2015, I had the privilege of accompanying Holocaust survivor Eva Kor and her Candles Museum group to Poland. Eva is one of the very few Holocaust survivors of the horrid experimentation on twins directed by Dr. Joseph Niemgoa, Auschwitz Angel of Death. This past year, Padua received a generous grant from the Arnold D. Kerr Holocaust Education Endowment Fund to bring Eva Kor to the entire community. We also hosted 2 teacher workshops on the Holocaust and human rights. One of the highlights of my personal and professional life was a 3-week fellowship sponsored by Yad Vashem's Institute for Holocaust Educators in Jerusalem. Ephraim Kay, the director of the Institute, left us with an important mandate on Holocaust education. He said, "Teach it right." To that commitment, it has been essential to talk to survivors, those who bear witness to the truth of the Holocaust, whether in Israel, Poland, Germany, or the United States. Whenever I would meet a survivor and ask them, why were they willing to share such personal tragedies, they would always say the same thing: don't let our stories die. For more than 40 years, Delaware's own Dorothy Finger, who recently passed away, and Ann Jaffe have shared with thousands of students, including those at Padua, their harrowing stories of survival in the forests of Poland. Professor Jan Rodczak, now in his 90s, has visited my classes, sharing his testimony of life in Auschwitz and Theresienstadt. And let me just add that in his 90s, he still drives himself from Stone Gates in Greenville. Currently, there are no more than 8 Holocaust survivors living in Delaware. The voices of those who remain after the slaughter of more than 6 million members of the Jewish faith are growing silent. And this vanishing of the collective memory is reflected in the challenge to include proper Holocaust education. According to a 2018 report by the Claims Conference, a group that negotiates restitution for Holocaust survivors, 66% of millennials could not identify Auschwitz. 22% had not heard or were unfamiliar with the Holocaust. And additionally, 68% of millennials wrongly think that Hitler came to power by force. This gap in awareness, coupled with the alarming increase of incidents of anti-Semitism, underscores the importance of Holocaust education so that future generations do not ever forget. Today, on Yom HaShoah, the day of remembrance of the Holocaust and heroism, I wish to close with an excerpt of a prayer written by Rabbi Sheila Weinberg. She wrote, "One God, we pray to you, grant us a vision of unity. May we see the many in one and the one in many. Guide us gently and firmly towards each other, toward peace." I have this prayer in room 324 as a reminder of why I teach the Holocaust, how very humbled I am in this endeavor, and how I continue to study in order to meet Frime K's mandate, teach it right. Thank you.
Thank you for your eloquent words, Barbara. I'm now going to call upon Rabbi Ellen Bernhardt.
A prayer for Yom HaShoah, composed by the Chief Rabbi Lord Sachs. Today on Yom HaShoah, we remember the victims of the greatest crime of man against man. The young, the old, the innocent, the 1.5 million children starved, shot, given lethal injections, gassed, burned, and turned to ash, because they were deemed guilty of the crime of being different. We remember what happens when hate takes hold of the human heart and turns it to stone. What happens when victims cry for help and there is no one listening. What happens when humanity fails to recognize that those who are not in our arms are nonetheless in God's image. We remember and pray tribute to the survivors who bore witness to what happened and to the victims, so that robbed of their lives, they would not be robbed also of their deaths. We remember and give thanks for the righteous of the nations who saved lives, often at their own risk, teaching us how the darkest night we can light a candle of hope. Today on Yom HaShoah, we call on you, Almighty God, to help us hear your voice that says in every generation, do not murder. Do not stand idly by the blood of your neighbor. Do not oppress the stranger. We know that whilst we do not have the ability to change the past, we can change the future. We know that whilst we cannot bring back dead to life, we can ensure that their memories live on and that their deaths were not in vain. And so, on this Yom HaShoah, we commit ourselves to one simple act, Yizkor, remember. May the souls of the victims be bound in the bond of everlasting life, and let us all say, Amen.
I'm now going to call upon Cantor Flynn and Rabbi Beals. Cantor Flynn is going to lead us in the Kalmali, the memorial prayer in Hebrew, and then Rabbi Beals in English. Please rise.
Elmai rachamim shochen b'mromim Hamsei menucha nechona tachat kanvei hashchina b'malut kiddushim u'teharim ki zorakei ha'zirim et nishmut 6 מיליון אחינו ואחיותינו שנחלקו על קידוש השם. בעל הרחמים יסתירים בסתר כנפיו לעולמים. ויצרו החיים את נשמתם. אדוני הוא נחלתם. וינוחו בשלום על משכבם. ונאמר אמן.
Exalted, compassionate God, grant infinite rest in your sheltering presence among the holy and pure to the souls of our brethren who perished in the Shoah, men, women, and children of the house of Israel, who were slaughtered and suffocated and burned to ashes. May the memory endure and inspire deeds of charity and goodness in our lives. May their souls thus be bound up in the bond of life. May they rest in peace. And let us all say,
Amen.
Now going to call upon Rabbi Koppel to lead us in the mourner's Kaddish.
As we recite the mourner's Kaddish, we remember Lori Gilbert Kay, whose murder in Poway, California, while at a festival Yizkor Passover service, was murdered. A painful reminder that never again is always and never again is now, that never again is a prayer and a promise, and that it remains our mandate, our charge, and our sacred obligation. And we say Kaddish, our memorial prayer, for the 6 million Jewish victims of the Holocaust. We think of the countless others who were also murdered in the Holocaust by the Nazis. And together we pray. Yitkadal v'yitkadash shmei Rabbi, v'yalma divrach rutei v'yamlich malchutei, v'chayechon v'yomechon v'chayei dechol Beit Yisrael, v'gala u'bizman kariv v'yimru amen. Yehi shmei Rabbi mevarach le'olam u'lalmei u'lmaya, Yitbarach, v'yishtabach, v'yitpa'ar, v'yitromam, v'yitnaseh, v'yithadar, v'yitaleh, v'yithalal, shemei d'kudsha, v'richu, le'ela min kol birchata, v'shirata, tushbechata, v'nechemata, d'amiran v'alma, v'imru, amen. Yehi shlama rabba min shnaya, v'chayim aleinu v'al kol Yisrael, v'imru, amen. Oseh shalom b'mromav, Hu ya'aseh shalom, aleinu ve'al kol Yisrael, v'imru. Amen.
Thank you, Rabbi Koppel. Before concluding, we're going to call upon Rabbi Beals to recite a concluding benediction, and then we'll actually conclude by singing the partisan song together afterwards, which was given out. So I could now call upon Rabbi Robinson for the mourners for concluding benediction.
the words of Alden Solovey after the horror. Hold fast to the breath of life. Hold fast to the song of life. Hold fast to the soul of life. This is my sacred duty, God of old. As survivor, as witness, as a voice of history and truth. Why else did I live when so many died? Why else do I stand when so many were put to rest? Why else do I hope and yearn when so many were silenced? Hold fast to awe and wonder. Hold fast to radiance and light. Hold fast to mystery and majesty. This is my sacred duty, God of old, as mourner, as testimony to horror and destruction. What else remains? What else endures? What more can you ask of me but to choose life in the shadow of death? Therefore, Uvacharta v'chayim, let us choose life, as we say. Amen.
Thank you, Rabbi Robinson. We'll now conclude with the partisan song. I'm going to invite my colleagues here to all join us. I certainly can't carry a tune, so they'll cover for me.
Ready? Sonne kein Rollers, du gehst den letzten Weg. Heute kämpfen bleiben auf dem schönen neuen Tag. Willkommen wird noch unser ausgewählte Schau. Es wird erbeugt an unser Trott, wir seien da. Willkommen wird noch unser ausgewählte Schau. Es wird erbeugt an unser Trott, wir seien da. Wo grünem Hammelland mit weißem Land und Schnee. Wir seien da mit unser Bein, mit unser Weg. Und wann gefallen sie, so schwitzen unser Blut.
wird das sprotzt an unser Gute, unser Mut. Und wo gefallen sie, das spritzen unser Boot, wird das sprotzt an unser Gute Ruht.
Thank you very much, everybody. That concludes our ceremony.